The deep roar of Barron Trump's motorcycle shattered the silence of the empty parking lot. He turned off the engine, but before he could get off, something caught his eye. An older man, moving slowly with a weary expression, was struggling to push a row of shopping carts that seemed far too heavy for him. Barron observed for a moment and then made a decision. What happened next wouldn't just change that man's life, it would also deeply resonate with yours. Before we continue, let us know where you are watching from. If you enjoy inspiring stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special one waiting for you. The soft morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Earl's modest home. Rising slowly, he felt the weight of another long day pressing heavily on his shoulders. His back ached with every movement, but he ignored the pain as he did every morning. He had to stay strong for his wife, Margaret, who was still sleeping peacefully in the next room. The kitchen, though simple, radiated a cozy and welcoming charm. The walls were adorned with old photographs, a smiling wedding portrait, a beach trip from the 1970s, and a joyful family Christmas gathering. Earl paused in front of the pictures. Where did those days go? He wondered, absently twisting the wedding ring on his finger. After brewing a plain cup of coffee, Earl made his way to Margaret's room. She was sitting up in bed, gazing blankly into space. Alzheimer's had taken so much from her, but Earl still found glimpses of the woman he adored in her eyes. Kneeling beside her, he gently took her hand. "Good morning," he said softly. Margaret didn't reply, but a faint smile touched her lips. For Earl, that was enough. He helped her up, guiding her to the bathroom and then the kitchen table. As she settled into her chair, he organized her medications. Each pill felt like a marker of the daily struggles they faced together. "Today will be a good day, honey," he murmured, almost as if convincing himself. In the living room, reality waited for him. On the table lay a daunting stack of bills, many stamped with late payment notices. Earl let out a heavy sigh, picking up one and scanning its contents with tired eyes. "Maybe I can pick up a few extra shifts at the market," he muttered, searching for some semblance of hope. Before leaving, Earl returned to Margaret's room to say goodbye. She was clutching their wedding photo, a ritual she repeated nearly every day. Stroking her silver hair gently, Earl whispered, "I'll be back soon. Take care of yourself, my love." Margaret didn't speak, but in her gaze, Earl caught a fleeting moment of recognition, a small yet precious glimmer of the bond they shared. Closing the door, Earl took a final glance at the sky, now painted with the soft hues of dawn. He drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day ahead pressing heavily on his chest. With a quiet, almost pleading tone, he whispered to himself, "Give me strength for one more day." Little did he know this day would bring something that would transform his life forever. The market parking lot was already alive with activity by the time Earl arrived. He stepped out of his aging sedan, a vehicle that bore as many marks of time as he did. His knees groaned in protest as he got out, and he reached into the back seat for his faded work vest. The fabric, worn thin over years of use, carried a quiet dignity that matched Earl's character. "Another day," he murmured to himself, walking toward the scattered shopping carts. The morning air was crisp and cool, a small mercy he knew wouldn't last. Soon the summer sun would bear down, turning the asphalt into a sweltering expanse. Earl moved methodically, organizing the carts into neat rows. His hands pushed them carefully, his eyes sharp to ensure none would roll loose. Each motion sent a sharp pain shooting through his knee, but stopping wasn't an option. Time was against him, and he couldn't afford to fall behind. Pausing for a moment, Earl wiped the sweat from his brow, his gaze drifting across the bustling parking lot. Cars filled nearly every space, and shoppers hurried past him with little regard. A young man, pushing his cart too quickly, nearly collided with Earl. "Sorry, sir," the man called over his shoulder as he disappeared toward the store. "Sir," Earl repeated under his breath, a faint, bitter smile tugging at his lips. He knew his age showed in every line on his face, every slow movement, but hearing it aloud always struck a chord, a stark reminder of time's relentless march. As Earl added another row of carts to the lineup, a sharp voice rang out from behind him. "Earl, what's going on here? Why are these carts still all over the place?" It was the manager, a man in his 30s whose impatience seemed to grow louder with every interaction. Earl straightened up despite the ache in his knee, meeting the man's frustrated tone with calm resolve. "I'm organizing them now, sir. Just need a few more minutes," Earl replied evenly. "A few more minutes?" the manager retorted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "If you moved any slower, we'd need 2 people just to keep up with your pace." Earl clenched his jaw but held back the retort, bubbling beneath the surface. Speaking up would only escalate things, and he couldn't risk the job he needed so desperately. Instead, he turned back to the carts, his movements now more deliberate, his frustration channeled into his work. The clattering of metal wheels echoed through the parking lot, As he lined up the final row, one of the carts slipped free, rolling dangerously close to a parked car. Earl's reflexes, slower with age, barely managed to catch it in time. The effort sent a sharp jolt through his knee, and he leaned against the cart, momentarily winded. He took a moment to steady his breath, feeling the sting of exhaustion mingled with determination. "Just one more day, Earl," he muttered under his breath, closing his eyes for a moment. "Just one more day." Glancing up at the sky, he whispered a silent prayer, not for miracles or drastic changes, but simply for the strength to carry on. "Please, God, just help me get through this day," he said softly, his voice tinged with quiet resignation. As Earl bent to line up the carts once again, he was unaware that someone was watching him from across the parking lot. A young man on a motorcycle had parked in the distance and removed his helmet. His gaze lingered on Earl, observing his movements in the exchange with the manager. Adjusting his sunglasses, the man crossed his arms, deep in thought about what he had just witnessed. Earl, oblivious to the watchful stranger, returned to his work, unaware that this person would soon play a pivotal role in his story. The faint hum of a motorcycle reverberated through the parking lot. It was a classic model, its sturdy engine purring with a quiet confidence rather than an aggressive roar. The rider, dressed in a sleek black jacket and sunglasses, parked in a far corner away from the crowd. Barron Trump calmly dismounted, removed his helmet, and ran a hand through his neatly styled hair. He stood still for a moment, scanning the bustling scene before him with quiet intensity. It was clear he wasn't there to shop. There was a deeper purpose to his presence. That's when he noticed Earl, hunched over a row of shopping carts, struggling to align them. Barron's sharp eyes caught the subtle tension in Earl's movements, the way he paused frequently to rub his knee, and the pained look on his face. He also noticed the manager, now idly chatting with another employee, seemingly indifferent to Earl's struggle. Barron frowned. Something about the scene didn't sit right with him. An inner resolve took hold, compelling him to act. Without drawing attention to himself, Barron began walking toward Earl. When he was close enough, he spoke in a calm yet firm voice. "Do you need help with that?" Startled, Earl looked up, his eyes meeting those of the tall, composed man standing in front of him. Something about the young man seemed familiar, though Earl couldn't quite place his face. "No, don't worry, sir, I've got it under control," Earl said with a tired smile. Barron took a step closer, his eyes flicking to the scattered row of carts. "I insist," he said with a small, reassuring smile. Before Earl could protest further, Barron was already helping push the line of carts into place. "Look, I appreciate it, but this is my job," Earl said, trying to regain control of the situation. Barron paused and looked at Earl, his expression calm, yet resolute. "Sometimes even the strongest need a helping hand. Don't worry, I just want to lend mine." Earl hesitated, but something in Barron's tone put him at ease. With a deep sigh, he relented. "Well, if you really want to help, start with those over there." He motioned to another scattered line of carts. Barron nodded as if accepting a mission and got to work without hesitation. As they worked side by side, Barron broke the silence with a question. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "A few years," Earl replied. "Ever since my wife got sick, I needed a job to keep up with the bills. It's not easy, but it's what I've got." Barron listened closely, his focused expression showing he was truly paying attention. He didn't interrupt, but his empathetic gaze encouraged Earl to continue. Feeling unexpectedly comforted by Barron's calm demeanor, Earl found himself opening up further. He shared stories about his wife, Margaret, and the good times they had shared before Alzheimer's turned their lives upside down. As Earl spoke, Barron asked thoughtful questions, not intrusive, but enough to show he genuinely wanted to understand the burden Earl carried. After they'd lined up a significant number of carts, Barron looked over and said, "How about we take a break? My treat." Earl hesitated, reluctant to leave his post, but the thirst and exhaustion ultimately won out. Together, they walked to a small coffee shop inside the market where Barron bought 2 coffees. They settled onto a bench outside, sipping their drinks as they watched the busy parking lot. "Have you ever thought about retiring?" Barron asked casually, breaking the silence. Earl let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Retire? With what money? I sold almost everything I had to pay for Margaret's treatment. What's left barely covers the bills." Barron looked down at the cup of coffee in his hands, his expression thoughtful and quiet for a moment. "You've done a lot for her. That's admirable," Barron said sincerely. Earl shrugged, a faint, bittersweet smile on his face. "That's what any husband would do. When you love someone, no matter what, you keep fighting." The words lingered in Barron's mind. He could tell Earl wasn't seeking pity or recognition. It was just the unvarnished truth of a man devoted to the love of his life. Finishing his coffee, Barron looked at Earl, clearly moved. Something about this encounter felt meaningful, as though fate had put Earl in his path for a reason. "You're a strong man, Earl. Stronger than most people I've met," Barron said earnestly. Earl chuckled faintly, his voice tinged with humility. "I don't know if it's strength, maybe it's just stubbornness." Barron laughed softly in return, but his gaze remained serious. Unspoken yet firm, he had already made up his mind about what he needed to do. Earl's story had struck a chord, making Barron reflect deeply on sacrifice and resilience in ways he hadn't before. As he watched Earl return to work, Barron felt compelled to act, something big, something meaningful. He just wasn't sure how Earl would take it when the time came. After finishing his coffee, Barron suggested heading back to the parking lot to continue organizing carts. Yet there was something in his tone that hinted he wasn't done talking. Earl noticed but chose not to interrupt what seemed to be genuine curiosity. As they worked side by side, Barron casually asked, "You mentioned your wife. How is she doing now?" Earl took a deep breath before answering, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Margaret, she's strong, stronger than I am. But Alzheimer's doesn't give you much of a break. Some days are good, some not so good. Today, I'd say, was neutral." Barron paused for a moment, processing Earl's words. Then with quiet concern, he asked, "And the treatment? You mentioned selling a lot of your belongings. How are you managing to keep it going?" Earl stopped briefly, leaning on a cart for support. His gaze drifted to the horizon as if drawing strength to respond. "I sold the house we built together," Earl said softly. "It was our home, filled with memories, but I had to pay for her first therapy sessions and medications. After that, I sold the furniture, the car, almost everything we owned. All I kept were the essentials for her care." Barron remained silent, absorbing every word. Earl continued, sensing he had finally found someone willing to listen. "The work here at the market doesn't pay much, but it's just enough to get by. The problem is Margaret's medications. They're so expensive, and I can't stop buying them." "What about you?" Barron asked, his voice low but filled with genuine concern. "How are you taking care of yourself?" Earl managed a tired smile. "There's not much time or money for that, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that she gets what she needs." Barron stayed quiet, his hands gripping the cart in front of him, as though trying to process everything Earl had just said. Finally, he spoke. "Have you thought about asking for help? Friends? Family?" Earl shook his head. "Most people have their own battles to fight. I can't expect them to carry mine too. And if I'm being honest, pride gets in the way. I've always been the type to believe in solving my own problem." Barron smiled faintly, though a shadow of sadness crossed his eyes. "You're not alone in thinking that. A lot of people feel the same way, but sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing we can do." After a moment, Barron placed a hand on Earl's shoulder. The gesture was brief, yet deeply meaningful. "Earl, you're an admirable man. Believe it or not, the world needs people like you. You deserve some relief." Earl didn't know how to respond. There was something in Barron's tone, so sincere, so earnest, that disarmed him. At the same time, it brought him an odd sense of comfort. "I've made my decision," Earl said, his voice firm as though to end the discussion. "Margaret is my priority. She always will be." Barron nodded, respecting Earl's resolve, though the look in his eyes hinted that a plan was already forming in his mind. As the day wore on, Barron stayed in the parking lot, helping Earl with the carts and watching him as he tackled each small task. He noticed how Earl ignored his physical pain, how he endured the manager's sarcastic remarks without losing his composure, and how, despite it all, he carried himself with quiet dignity. When Earl's shift finally ended, Barron extended his hand, gripping Earl's firmly. "I hope we meet again, Earl." Earl smiled faintly. "If you keep coming around here, I'm sure we will." Barron laughed lightly. "You can count on it." As Earl drove away, carrying the weight of another long day, Barron lingered in the parking lot for a few more moments. He knew he couldn't change Earl's past, but something inside him insisted that he could do something for the man's future and for Margaret's. As Barron mounted his motorcycle and adjusted his helmet, he cast one last glance toward the horizon, where Earl's car was disappearing. "He deserves more than this," Barron murmured to himself. At that moment, he resolved to act, something meaningful, something Earl would never forget. That night, Barron couldn't stop thinking about Earl and his story. As he sat at home, reflecting on everything he had learned, he realized how even small actions could have a profound impact. He knew he couldn't change everything about Earl's life, but he could help lighten his load. With that decision in mind, Barron began to plan. The next morning, Barron returned to the market, this time with a clear purpose. He walked into the manager's office and requested a private conversation. "How can I help you?" the manager asked, eyeing Barron with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He remembered seeing Barron in the parking lot the day before. Barron, calm and composed, replied, "Yes, you can help me. I'm here to talk about Earl." The manager raised an eyebrow. "Earl? What about him?" "He works tirelessly every day, all while carrying burdens most of us can't imagine. I want to make sure he gets the support he deserves, Barron explained firmly. The manager looked puzzled. You want to help him? Without a word, Barron reached into his jacket, pulled out a check, and placed it on the desk. I want to pay Earl's salary for the next few months. Also, I want him to have a few days off to rest, and I need your cooperation to make sure this happens without making him uncomfortable. The manager stared at the check, visibly stunned. That's generous, but he probably won't take it. Earl is a proud man. Barron smiled faintly. I know. That's why this has to be done anonymously. He can't know the money is coming from me. Just tell him it's a special market bonus or something. Can I count on you? After a moment of hesitation, the manager nodded. I think we can make it work. Still at the market, Barron walked over to the customer service desk and asked for a list of nearby pharmacies. He was determined to ensure Margaret's treatment costs were covered as well. A quick call to the pharmacy where Earl regularly picked up her medications confirmed the details, and Barron had arranged payment for the next few months. Before leaving, Barron stopped at a nearby coffee shop and purchased 2 drinks. Returning to the parking lot, he found Earl organizing the last row of carts before his break. Coffee, Barron offered, handing one of the cups to Earl. Earl accepted it with a tired smile. You're a good man, you know that. Barron laughed lightly. I just like coffee. Sitting down on the same bench where they had spoken the day before, Barron looked at Earl with genuine admiration. You're an inspiring man, Earl. Truly. Earl shook his head modestly. I'm just doing what needs to be done. That's exactly what makes you special, Barron said. Most people would have given up, not you. Earl shrugged. Loving someone means being there no matter what. Barron was silent for a moment, contemplating Earl's words before asking cautiously, I know you don't accept help easily, but if someone came along and wanted to do something for you, what would you say? Earl frowned slightly, caught off guard by the question. I'd say they should help someone who really needed it, Earl replied firmly. Barron smiled knowingly. You're that person, Earl. But let's forget about that. Let's talk about something else. At the end of Earl's shift, the manager called him into the office. Earl entered cautiously, confused by the unexpected summons. The manager handed him an envelope. What's this? Earl asked suspiciously. It's a special bonus, the manager replied, avoiding direct eye contact. You've earned it. Earl opened the envelope slowly. Inside was an amount large enough to cover his expenses for the next few months. His hands trembled as he held the paper, and his eyes welled with tears. I don't know what to tea, he whispered, overwhelmed. Just enjoy it, the manager said, hiding a small, knowing smile. When Earl returned home that evening, he held the envelope as if it were a treasure. As he stepped inside, he saw Margaret sitting in her usual spot, clutching their wedding photo. Kneeling beside her, he gently took her hand and said, his voice breaking, My love, we have a chance. Everything's going to be all right now. Margaret looked at him, and for a brief moment, a genuine smile spread across her face. Earl felt as though he had received the greatest gift of all. As Earl silently gave thanks for the unexpected miracle, Barron sat on his motorcycle in the distance, watching the small, humble home. He gently revved the engine and disappeared down the road. His heart felt lighter, knowing this wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was the beginning of something bigger. The next morning, Earl woke up early, as he always did, but this time the weight he usually carried seemed lighter. A sense of relief filled the air. He walked to the living room table and opened the envelope he had received the day before, once again gazing at its contents to confirm it was real. Inside, next to the money, was a simple note written in elegant, neat handwriting. Take care of her. You are not alone. Earl read the message over and over, moved by the words. He didn't know who had sent the gift, but for the first time in years, he felt that someone genuinely cared. After preparing breakfast, Earl walked over to Margaret, who was sitting in her favorite chair, still holding their wedding photo. Kneeling beside Inert, he gently took her hands. Margaret, he said softly, we have good news. Someone, an angel perhaps, has helped us. At least for now, our financial troubles are behind us. You'll continue to get the care you need. He expected her usual silence, or at most the vacant smile that had become her norm. But to his astonishment, Margaret raised her eyes and looked directly at him. There was a spark of clarity in her gaze, something he hadn't seen in years. Earl, she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Earl froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Margaret, you... She smiled, the same radiant smile Earl remembered from the early years of their marriage. I feel like I'm waking up from a long, hazy dream. You're here, it's you. Tears streamed down Earl's face. Unable to respond immediately, he gently cupped on Margaret's face in his hands, as if to confirm this moment was real. Yes, it's me. I'm here. I've always been here. Margaret's eyes roamed around the room as though rediscovering every familiar corner of their home. Our house, it's different, but it's still ours, isn't it? Earl nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, my love, it's still ours. Margaret's fingers brushed the wedding photo resting in her lap. I remember this, our day. It was so beautiful. It was the happiest day of my life. Mine too, Earl said softly. Margaret looked at him with a twinkle in her eye. Today can be another day like that, Earl. Dance with me. Earl was momentarily speechless, but quickly rose to his feet and extended his hand to her. Margaret, though moving slowly, placed her hand in his and stood. He led her to the center of the room, and as they stole toward her, Earl began humming the tune that had played on their wedding day. Margaret's face lit up as he guided her in a simple, yet deeply meaningful dance. For those precious moments, the world around them faded away, and they were back in the ballroom of their youth, dancing as though time had never passed. I missed you, Margaret whispered. I never stopped being here, my love, Earl replied, holding her gently, as though afraid the moment might slip away. That day felt like pure magic. Margaret remained lucid, sharing memories with Earl, laughing and even helping in the kitchen as she used to. They reminisced about their happiest times, and for Earl, it felt as if he had been given the greatest gift imaginable. As the evening settled in, Margaret sat in her favorite chair, looking at Earl with a serene expression. Thank you for never giving up on me. I love you, she said, her voice soft yet full of gratitude. Earl took her hand, his eyes brimming with tears. I love you, Margaret. Always. Meanwhile, Barron was on his motorcycle, already heading to another destination. Yet his thoughts lingered on Earl and Margaret. He knew that what he had done made a difference, but he also recognized that the true miracle came from the love and resilience Earl demonstrated every single day. Stopping on a quiet, deserted road, Barron removed his helmet and gazed out at the horizon. A slight smile appeared on his face as he thought to himself, sometimes the smallest gestures have the biggest impacts. Barron understood that true kindness didn't need recognition. It thrived in the quiet knowledge that a life had been touched. In the days that followed, Margaret's clarity gradually faded again, like a flame flickering in the wind. But for Earl, that one miraculous day remained etched in his heart forever, a treasure he would carry through every challenge. Whenever he faced hardship, he would remember dancing with Margaret, her radiant smile lighting up the room as if the years had never passed. Earl continued with his routine, now filled with renewed strength and hope. He realized that even in the darkest moments, love and kindness could overcome any hardship. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the small house, Earl sat on the porch beside Margaret, holding her hand. He gazed up at the sky and whispered softly, "Thank you, whoever you are. You saved more than our lives. You gave us hope." Far down the road, Barron Trump sped along on his motorcycle, the wind rushing past his face. He didn't need to look back to know he had done the right thing. Sometimes the greatest acts of kindness leave their deepest marks in silence. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to explore many more that inspire hope, compassion, and resilience. Click on the screen to discover stories that will warm your soul and remind you of the goodness in the world.